Today we're going to walk you through the magical steps of digesting celery. I'm Grace.
I'm Acacia.
I'm Jared.
And I'm Tatum.
And we're in Mrs. Malloy's 4th period Human Body Systems class. The journey of digestion begins in the oral cavity. The oral cavity is a technical term for the mouth. The celery will enter the mouth and be greeted by saliva and teeth. The mechanical part of digestion begins with the teeth breaking apart the celery. The salivary glands release saliva, which contains water, electrolytes, mucus, and an enzyme called amylase. There are 3 different salivary glands: the parotid, the sublingual, and the submandibular. This is where the chemical part of digestion begins. Amylase assists in breaking down starches into simpler sugars. A bolus, or a mass of chewed food, is formed. The tongue is a muscular organ that moves celery around the mouth and assists in swallowing. The tongue is covered in a moist pink tissue called mucosa. The hard palate is toward the front of the mouth and holds the roots of the teeth. The soft palate assists in swallowing and creates space in the oral cavity for yawns. The uvula is located at the back of the soft palate. The bolus will now travel down the pharynx towards the esophagus. In order to prevent aspiration, the epiglottis covers the trachea. If this weren't to happen, food would enter our trachea and then our lungs. This would cause us to choke and possibly develop pneumonia.
The celery then enters the esophagus to begin digestion. It begins its push towards the stomach by performing something called peristaltic movement. This is the movement in which the esophagus forces the celery, or any food, towards the stomach. Keep in mind the esophagus is not involved in any digestion of food. It is only the pathway to send the food in the correct direction. Before entering the stomach, the food reaches the lower esophageal sphincter. This first sphincter makes sure the celery is on the right track and doesn't re-enter the esophagus. The food has now reached the stomach and will begin its process to digest the celery. First of all, we must identify that the stomach has 5 main functions: digesting food, secreting gastric juices in order to break down food, secreting and producing gastric hormones, regulating how quickly food enters the small intestine, and absorbing small quantities of water and dissolved substances. The celery has reached the stomach at this point and has been made into a substance called chyme. Chyme is a semi-fluid mass made of partially digested food. It is mixed by the breaking down of proteins and acids formed by gastric glands or stomach glands. In order to make sure the food is decontaminated or cleaned, the stomach acid specifically makes sure no foreign invaders or bacteria gets into your body. Acids and enzymes, in order to perform those protective functions, are formed by simple columnar epithelial cells that make up mucosa, or a mucous membrane, and gastric pits that secrete or push out enzymes. You are probably wondering how all of these stomach acids aren't digested in the midst of everything. They are not digested because of the stomach's tough, protective lining, which keeps our stomach intact. The mucus layer of the stomach is what makes up the lining. Referring back to the sphincters, the celery has now reached the pyloric sphincter, which is an opening that releases food into the small intestine. The stomach has performed both mechanical and chemical processes before reaching the small intestine. Mechanical being the churning of food to be broken down, and the chemical process being the role of gastric acids to also break down the food. Now to the intestines.
Once the celery has made its way through the stomach, the next stops are the small and large intestine. Despite being called small, the small intestine is actually 20 feet long. This organ is broken up into 3 sections called the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. When food enters the small intestine, it is dropped into the duodenum as an acidic pulp. It gets mixed with bile and other digestive juices. Metals such as magnesium and iron are absorbed here. Once that is done, the food moves to the jejunum, where most of the digestion occurs. This large area is covered with things called villi, which are like long bumps that maximize the surface area available in the small intestine. More surface area means more nutrients can be absorbed. Simple sugars such as vitamins, fats, and amino acids are all absorbed here and pumped into the body. The last area, the ileum, also has villi, but only absorbs a few vitamins and acids known as bile salts. It also has the job of moving what's left down to the large intestine. Like the stomach, this whole area is acidic, with a pH ranging from 4 to 7, which means it's slightly acidic but more neutral. It uses enzymes in order to break down the different nutrients. For carbs, it uses pancreatic, amylase, and maltase. For proteins, trispin and peptidases. And for nucleic acid, nucleases and nucleotidases. And for lipids, lipases. Most of these enzymes are just named after what they break down specifically. What enters the large intestine is anything from the food that cannot be broken down in the small intestine any further. The job of this organ is to dehydrate these remnants and remove them from the body. It keeps the body hydrated as well as makes sure that waste is relatively solid. Like the small intestine, the large intestine is broken up into pieces, each with a different purpose. The first is the cecum. This absorbs digestive fluid and moves what's left along. Next is the appendix. This stores bacteria, but this is only a theory and many would consider it vestigial. Next is the colon. This moves leftovers along with just dehydrating them and desalting them. And then there's the rectum. This, once enough pressure builds up, it signals when you need to poop. And lastly is the anus. As most of you know, this is where the poop leaves the body.
Depending on what food you have, the pancreas will release different enzymes in order to aid in digestion or breakdown of the food that was eaten. For example, celery is made up mostly of carbohydrates. The enzyme responsible for the breakdown of carbohydrates is called amylase. Amylase is found in the saliva and it is produced by the salivary glands, pancreas, and the small intestine. The pancreas is a 6-inch long organ that sits behind the stomach. The pancreas's job is to convert food to nutrients or fuel for the body's cells and to regulate blood sugar. The pancreas is involved in the digestive system because of the enzymes it produces, because enzymes help to break down particles in different types of food. For instance, the pancreas produces lipase, used to break down fat, protease, used to break down proteins, and amylase, used to break down carbohydrates. Once the celery is eaten and partially broken down by amylase, the food continues to go to the GI tract. Once the food reaches the small intestine, the liver secretes bile and processes the nutrients absorbed by the small intestine. The liver is an organ which has a size of 15 centimeters wide and a weight of about 3 pounds. The liver is located in the upper right-hand portion of the abdominal cavity above the stomach. The function of the liver is to digest nutrients absorbed by the small intestine and to release bile, which helps in the digestion of fats. The liver also clears the blood of drugs or harmful substances, stores or releases glucose, produces cholesterol, and regulates other chemicals. Although there is a very small amount of fat in celery, it still needs to be broken down. The liver releases bile so that it can be digested within the small intestine. If you ever eat a meal high in fat, your gallbladder will release the bile that it has stored in order to help digest the amount of fat. The liver releases bile into a duct in which the bile then travels to the gallbladder in small amounts, and small amounts of it is stored so it can be released when your intake of fats is high.
1.
Fun facts about the digestive system. Human beings eat a lot of food every day, but do you know how much we eat per year? It's a lot. 1,100 pounds of food per year is how much the average human being consumes. Do you ever stop and think to yourself, I haven't swallowed in a while? No matter if you realize it or not, you have to swallow rather often because your salivary glands produce 1.7 liters of saliva every day. You'd think that gravity plays a part in digestion, right? Wrong. Gravity has almost nothing to do with digestion. You could even eat while hanging upside down. Cancer of the digestive system is most common than any other cancer, with the exception of lung cancer. You learned that the stomach has acid in it, right? Well, the stomach has to protect itself from the harmful acids that it contains. A lot of cells line the stomach so that the acid does not cause holes in the stomach itself.